Based on an unofficial but very trustworthy poll that I found, Beast Boy is the third most likable member of the Teen Titans, a TV show that aired in the early 2000s. Not that one, or, oh god. Not that one. Kill it! Kill it! But considering how easygoing and chill Beast Boy is in the only Teen Titans show that I didn't watch out of morbid curiosity, it might be surprising to know that the guy's gone through some stuff. His powers were given to him because he was suffering from a childhood illness, his parents are dead, he was raised by the Doom Patrol, and the entire Doom Patrol died at some point. His name is Garfield. So I guess you could say that under the surface, even fun-loving characters may have darker facets to their story. Just some food for thought. On a completely unrelated note, let's talk about a character that can take on the form of any animal with serious daddy issues. Hey everyone, I'm V for Verbatim, and today we're talking about gifted education through thinly veiled metaphors and character development in the form of my next OC character breakdown. If you're not aware or your school didn't have something like this, gifted education is a series of resources and programs available at most schools that are for kids that are achieving academic excellence or are in some other way intellectually special. Sometimes gifted students are taken out of classes to do more difficult classwork and stimulate their minds or whatever. There's a video out there by Tiffany Ferg that really goes into depth about all of that and the effect that it has on people, but today's character is very much a representation of the flaws the title Gifted comes with. And I hope that doesn't sound like I'm saying smarter kids had it harder than most. In most ways, they definitely did not. She's the benefits and the costs of the concept of giftedness, combined into a character that has been difficult to put to paper over the decade of her existence. Hopefully this former gifted kid didn't do a terrible job with this one, and without dragging out anything too long, let's talk about Avery Alexa Atwell, and the life of a prodigy with an IQ of 225. Alexa Agarath was the first character I created outside the context of the Girl Scout event where I made Becky Adams, Romeo Starling, and Abzuba Black. She was probably drawn within a week or two of the first three, and she was more of a unique concept, I guess, at least compared to the other firsts. She was bitten by a radioactive kangaroo monster thing, yes, and she gained the ability to grow any animal appendage. Examples throughout writings and planned storylines include gaining the speed of a cheetah, growing wings, paws, regrowing her own limbs, and as you can see, increasing her ability to hear by growing bunny ears. Her defining feature in most drawings is those bunny ears, and because of a design feature from over a decade ago, she's still one of the most easily recognizable silhouettes among a menagerie of weirdos including aliens and angels. She's the most consistent character design, not losing her signature bunny ears even when Becky Adams lost her signature mask. Though she did lose some miscellaneous things, most notably the snake hair she had in early iterations, and the one major change early on was her jacket with her many pockets. It was kind of a design touch to show that she's more about practicality than aesthetic flair like many of the later characters. It also reflected a later addition to her story, her origins in Australia and her lineage as an Agarath. I toyed with a few other ideas for her story, such as her working for Max Astral, the Bezos-type main villain of the story, maybe making her a guy, but throughout it all she's remained Australian, and she's just not the most interesting character to look at least on a surface level. Alexa was probably inspired by Beast Boy, but I'm not sure if I was into Teen Titans at the time of creating her. She reminds me a little of the Wonder Twins, but again, I didn't know they existed at the time. If I had to guess, Alexa's probably a character I wanted to use to flex my unnecessary knowledge of animal behaviors and abilities that I learned from kids' TV shows and books about animals that I read religiously. But let's maybe not linger on my weird childhood obsessions. We have a lot to go over today, and hopefully you don't mind me starting from a different place. Starting with Avery is 17 years old at the beginning of the series. By the end of season 4, she's 33, though technically she considers herself 32, but that's a whole dimensional time-hopping thing we'll get to in a bit. She's 5'9", human obviously, white, with family roots dating all the way back to 1400s England and a respected family of Masons. She has one sibling, Alexander, whose title she based her own nickname. Her actual name was the name her father Arthur was planning on giving to her if she was a son, and he hadn't actually thought of a girl's name. Father of the year, clearly. Her mother is absent, which is probably for the best since Arthur was very confrontational, physically, towards her. Fun fact about today's character. Avery has the most technically advanced uniform despite its aesthetic simplicity. It's made of evoludium fiber, a fabric that learns and can stitch itself back together. Her growing of new limbs would constantly damage normal fabric, so she had to get more creative with the material. Otherwise, Alexa would be distracting her opponents with more than just her rabbit ears during 90% of her encounters, and if that were the case, I really don't think her love interest in the series would be able to hide her gay panic. Her birthday is April 16, 2026. She's bisexual, and while she is cisgender, she feels really comfortable presenting more masculinely at times. Her religion is unspecified since it doesn't change much story-wise, and while she can speak English, she can also speak basic bits and pieces of several Southeast Asian languages because of her father's business endeavors in Asia. Her powers as of now were the result of a serum she created using bits and pieces of animal DNA, though the contents of the serum were never entirely replicated or documented. The reason for this was because she wasn't aware of the extraterrestrial species she made use of. Avery studied demons and their accelerated healing factor for her stem cell research, uncovering what she assumed was a preserved skeleton of a demon during her early studies. It's why she chose the name Aussie Devil in the first place. She used DNA extracted from the specimen's bone marrow in her original serum. What it actually was, however, was a Pilagaran, a shape-shifting alien, that had taken a goat-like form for unknown reasons, meaning her ability to transform was possible because of the way that Pilagaran DNA reacted with Earth DNA. She's able to replicate the behaviors of animals, but is also able to take on traits rooted in fantasy, like breathing fire. Her approach to her powers is a unique understanding that no shape-shifting species had ever attempted up until her. She used her powers with a creative and intellectual approach. She lost those abilities after a blood transfusion in Season 3 of her story, however, because the serum coursing through her was designed to repair damaged cells. Her body assimilated with the serum when she injected it into herself, because she was injured at the time of the injection. But after years of using her powers, what was there left to repair? When normal blood cells were reintroduced to Avery's body through the transfusion, her mutated cells recognized the blood as a result of a fully repaired body, and her mutated cells began repairing themselves, trying to match the unmutated body. It's all fake as hell, but just go with it. She doesn't just use her abilities even if they are a significant element of her story. She's brilliant with machines and makes plenty of them for her teammates while also testing them occasionally in conflicts. She, however, doesn't use them herself on most occasions, choosing instead to use her own versions of Aboriginal weapons to honor the diverse cultures of her home country, Australia. Avery was a little harder to capture, which is why I had to completely redraw her and rethink little quirks to her character. She's meant to look weirdly normal, though there are little things that one could pick up on about her as the series goes on. If the show were to be animated, I would have it so her face is literally a copy and paste of the expression of whatever character is closest to her whenever she's a background on-screen character. My goal for her in design and personality is to have her blend in comfortably with everybody else. Her smiles are typically genuine in the first few seasons, but become more jaded and painful looking on occasions involving her father or as she starts to lose herself. Transformation-wise is where I would let her personality kind of run free. Her appearance and use of her powers would be fluffy and easy to comprehend when she's confident in battle, but with more serious threats, her appearance would constantly change and appear monstrous. If she were sad or upset, she would grow a tail that would wrap around her. She would eat like a cow on some days and like a wolf on others. If she were angry, she would grow extra eyes like a spider, and deer horns would pop out from under her hair whenever Becky triggers her bi panic. Her unabashed happiness is rare, but it usually comes out whenever someone asks her about her machines or her animal research. Having knowledge brings her joy, more than anything else, and she finds ways to bring out that joy in order to be a good teammate and friend across the series. Oh, and my favorite little thing, it would be an ongoing gag that Avery is really productive, with her teammates joking that she lives 2 hours for every 1 normal people live, when she talks about how much she gets done in any given time or shows people her daily schedules. It's both a quirk for her character and foreshadowing for her arc in Season 3. Now, before we get into her actual story, we've got a few colorful cast members to briefly go over. So let's talk about her most significant relationships in order of healthiest to less so. Becky is Avery's teammate, her childhood idol, her crush, and later her wife. She and Becky get along very well when they started as friends, though their romantic endeavors are slower moving because of Becky's homophobia ingrained to her from her life in the 1940s. The two are very close and support one another, not really arguing and instead resigning and avoiding each other like the plague until they feel ready to talk things over. They are affectionate even early on, but it's reserved at first because of their forbidden feelings for each other. Romeo is Avery's best friend. He's just a chill dude that Avery just kind of vibes with and appreciates for his own high intelligence. His IQ is 165, by the way. The two tease each other quite a bit, and what started out as a mutual crush evolved into Avery and Romeo basically just being really supportive bros. They hug each other often and are unabashedly appreciative of each other, which Becky is actually slightly jealous of before she lets herself fall in love with Avery in the end. Cassidy is another close friend, and the two of them bond over their love of tech and strategy. They tinker together often, but unlike Cassidy and Becky, the two of them don't really have heart-to-heart conversations because they're both emotionally closed off. Seeing as they're both from pretty terrible home lives, they find comfort in the presence of each other, and they don't have the desire to talk about the pain from their pasts. Avery initially disliked Azabeth Black because of her attitude and the way she seemed to treat Clara Barton, her own best friend. She assumed Azabeth was a toxic friend, but in reality, she's just bitterly loyal with a massive ego. Against her better judgment, Avery dangled her friendship and affection for Azabeth in front of her like a carrot on a stick, and was generally cruel towards her despite how hard Azabeth tried to look past her big-headedness and genuinely express her appreciation for Avery. She pushed and she pushed until somehow a healthier friendship was born from both of their strong wills. Being victims of abuse like her, she pities Mackenzie and Reagan, members of the team that joined later on, but isn't exactly friends with them. She does what she can to help both of them through their pain over the course of the series. The beta experiments were children that the main villain of the series, Max Astral, kidnapped and experimented on. Max was Mackenzie and Cassidy Joyce's abuser, so she pities their situation and struggles to take them down at times, knowing that they've been brainwashed by a man that is even more hostile than her own abusive father. Her family relationships are a little bit more complicated. She put the memory of her mother on a high pedestal since she saw her as her only means of escaping her father. Her brother, although never doing anything wrong, looked almost exactly like her father. She couldn't help but grow distant from him because of this. And it goes without saying that she fears and rages against her father for his abusive nature, but part of her still wants his approval despite the way he treated her in a past life. The Alchemist is a distant relative of Avery and a false prophet that believed he was above destiny. She didn't exactly hate him because she didn't know him very long in the story, but she did end up taking his pen name after he disappeared in Season 1. Her later actions in Season 4 are a parallel to him as well as her father. Somehow, Avery hates Max Astral more than her own father. He's arguably a worse person than her father because of his high body count, but she really despises the guy because of how poorly he treated Cassidy, Mackenzie, and his other children. That bit of explanation out of the way, let's finally get into the story. Avery was born a child prodigy. She could solve complex equations as early as 5 years old, and by age 10 she was building androids and automations from scratch while her peers were still trying to memorize their times tables. Her education was at a private academy until she was 12 years old and pulled out by her father Arthur Atwell, a wealthy politician and CEO of a massive tech empire, Bliss, and she and her older brother Alexander were in the public eye of Australia as children despite being homeschooled. Needless to say, they were held in high scrutiny for all of their life, and they seemed to be thriving on the outside. Behind closed doors, however, the Atwell children were at the mercy of their emotionally abusive father. Alexander caved under his father's pressure since he received the brunt of his angry outbursts. Meanwhile, Avery, somewhat overtaken by the fantasies of her graphic novels about heroes like Becky Adams freeing people from cruelty, attempted to flee his torment by getting in contact with her lost biological mother. She was never able to locate her, but she clung to the hope her supposed fictional heroes offered her. Throughout her life, Arthur Atwell used his daughter for his own personal gain. Used as a pawn in her father's diplomatic schemes, forced to fake illnesses and debilitating conditions in order to get business partners to ally with Arthur, and brought to hospitals almost weekly to manipulate her father's co-workers through sob stories, Avery actually discovered her true passion in life was the exact opposite of the path that shaped her father's legacy, the medical field. Praised by the public for her achievements in robotics, her true breakthroughs were in her spare time. She would develop cancer treatments and contributed to stem cell research under a pen name to avoid backlash from her father. I wasn't kidding about her being productive. On a fateful occasion, her father discovered the final experiment she would ever conduct in Australia. Test tubes with spliced DNA of many species of lizards, axolotls, mammals, even some of Avery's own DNA. Her goal was to create a serum that allowed humans to regenerate lost organs, but her father had the vials destroyed in front of her before putting her in her place. It was the last straw for her. She decided to run away to Chicago with her last prototype vial, but when stopped at airport security and asked to leave the suspicious vial behind, Avery decided to inject herself in order to save her countless years of research. Through the power of pseudoscience, she was mutated and gifted with the incredible ability to grow the appendages of any animal she could think of. It, of course, wasn't without consequences. While her DNA was mutating, she fell into unconsciousness and was hospitalized once her plane landed in Chicago. That was how she came to meet Cassidy Joyce, the woman that would change her life for better and for worse. Avery meets Cassidy Joyce and joins the team without much fanfare. Cassidy asks her later why she was so quick to join the team, and she explains that she recognized Cassidy as a servant of Max Astral, and because she knew of the terrible things Cassidy must have gone through, she joined the team out of respect. Throughout the season, Avery proves to be a valuable ally, being a brilliant mechanic, a life-saving medic, and even an expert in many combat techniques. She typically trains alongside some of the more experienced members of the team, including Cassidy, Romeo, and Becky Adams, who she quickly falls head over heels for. In Alexa's mind, the action figure and character from her childhood comic books is alive and thinks she's pretty cool, which is probably any nerd's dream, to be honest. So she pines hard. Really hard. At least for a while. Throughout the season, she's considered the most likable and easygoing member of the team, being pretty jokey and kind to everyone after getting over a few hurdles with Azaba. But beneath the surface lies the cruelty that her father programmed into her over years of manipulation. She actively antagonizes Azaba early on into their friendship because she sees her as less of a person since she doesn't fall in line as easily as everyone else. She comes to terms with her darker facets with the help of her other team members, but still struggles to keep herself in line at times. Her most significant appearances are in Friendship and Conspiracies, her first episode as Azaba's friend, Family Reunion where her father enters the United States to torment her, and The Telltale Heart where after an incident involving Cassidy almost murdering half the team, Avery is forced to confront her fear of the villains her and Cassidy are capable of becoming if they don't overcome their old lives. Avery has a little less to do over the course of Season 2, with a lot of the season's focus being on a team of villains that are rapidly gearing up to take the heroes out. Avery becomes swamped with taking care of medical emergencies whenever the heroes come back from dangerous missions involving the new team of villains. In the limited off time she has, she builds new weapons for the rest of the team. She also does a little bit of investigation into her own powers, discovering that she can give her powers to other people temporarily by injecting her own venom into another person. Later on, she gives vials of her venom to the heroes as a failsafe in later battles, and she begins donating it and her blood to nearby hospitals in order to aid patients in recovery. It's around this time that she begins to think about the future, having children, and, of course, the one she wants to create that future with. In the midst of everything, Avery acts without thinking and makes an advance on Becky. It doesn't go well and it leads into the episode Circle Talk. Again, Avery isn't very active during this season, but her actions and her failsafe vials are an extremely helpful addition to the heroes during the climax of the season. And her continued kindness and chill attitude is a blessing to new team members Mackenzie, Joyce, and Reagan in helping them recover from their abusers. Both of these elements, mind you, mark the beginnings of the final act of her story. Avery goes to space. Enough said, but I should elaborate. In Season 3, when their ship is infiltrated by a team of villains, Avery is separated from the rest of their team on an off-Earth mission and ends up on a jungle planet called Hendron. She's only separated from the rest of the team for a few days at most, but because of how the ship was separated through dimensional travel, she's trapped on the planet for almost a year in her own time. She befriends an alien that she nicknames Azaba and is protected by her and her colony for a few months, until she decides to make her way into the deeper forests. Her goal is to find a place with a high enough altitude to deliver a distress signal. She greatly underestimates the size of the planet and displays an extraordinary lack of preparation, so the trip is time-consuming. This side story is really a solo story that explores Avery's pride and tendency to become lost when she can't control a situation with her knowledge. Each situation teaches her something new, but each failure gets on her nerves and outweighs her love and pursuit of knowledge. Being alone doesn't help. The longer she's without someone to talk to, the quicker her friendly exterior begins to crumble. What starts out as a solo adventure becomes darker as her nonchalant facade is ripped away from her. She talks to herself, she rips out her hair when she believes the strands are parasites trying to dig into her skull, and she calls the voice in her head Arthur, as her period of isolation draws on. By the 8-month mark, she attacks everything that moves and takes their most valuable evolutionary traits into her own appearance permanently. Her hybrid friend finally goes looking for her and finds her walking in circles, Avery no longer recognizing her in her state of delirium. Azaba tries to talk her down and sort her head out, and that doesn't go well at all. In the end, Avery kills the hybrid that had once been kindly to her, which is also foreshadowing for Azaba's eventual death. It's only when she wipes the blood on her face that she snaps out of her lapse of judgment and regains enough of her sanity to continue on her way, though not enough to have the sense of rationality to not carry Azaba's body with her on her journey. She eventually makes it to her desired location, but not without an encounter from her real father Arthur, who at the end of Season 1 was ejected out into space and ended up on the planet as well. Avery, in her psychosis, takes her father down, and as the others arrive to take her home, She has to be dragged off of her father in order to stop her from killing the man, not even noticing the blood loss she had sustained over the course of the conflict. Romeo was rescued before her, and she stays with Avery so that she's no longer alone. She wasn't entirely stable after being mostly withdrawn from society for over a year, but when she reunites with Becky Adams and the rest of the team on Earth, she does improve and try to grow from the experience. It wasn't meant to be, because shortly after undergoing a blood transfusion for her injuries, Avery begins to notice her powers fading until they completely disappear. "13 years later, Avery Atwell has become a scientist alongside Romeo Starling, though her motivations aren't exactly as selfless as Romeo's were. While on the outside she's a weapons engineer for Cassidy's team, she also goes by a new secret pen name as a geneticist, the Alchemist. She's spent over a decade recreating multiple mutation serums to imitate the effects of her original prototype. She plans on injecting it into several test subjects and extracting their venom indefinitely, since she is obsessed with sustaining the power she once had. While her father has ultimately decided to leave her alone at this point, his influence is clear in the way she decides to put others in harm's way for her own personal gain, seemingly without realizing how selfish her actions truly are. Becky is unaware of this initially, but upon finding out towards the latter half of the final season when Romeo reveals the truth to her, she and Romeo attempt to destroy the serum while an enraged Avery tries to hunt them down. Over the course of the series, Becky and Avery have taught each other in the ways of hunting and tracking, so their conflict is evenly matched until Becky calls in the rest of the team. They try to bring her to her senses in the face of the final looming conflict of the series. Avery doesn't go down without a fight, however. She controls every weapon, tool, and enhancement the team has used over the course of the series. Once she turns on them, they're left with only their powers. Avery holds her own until Romeo and her brother Alexander are brought in to talk her down long enough for Becky to pin her and Reagan to come in and knock her unconscious. Again, it takes time for her to come to her senses. She's been through a lot and continues to struggle with the darker facets of her personality, but by the end of the series, after her alter ego the Alchemist has become a criminal in the eyes of the Chicago public, she saves all of her inventions and research on a hard drive that she gives to Cassidy Joyce, before setting all of her existing tech to self-destruct, a final freeing of herself from her father's planned future for her. With the legacy of the Aussie Devil still intact and the Alchemist's name completely raked through the mud, Avery travels back to the past with Becky, ready to settle into a life of peace with the woman she loved. Alexa clearly wears a lot of hats in her story. She's a wild card, so brilliant that her attacks appear random and unpredictable to her enemies. She's a parallel to Cassidy, a character similarly struggling to not let her former abuser control her. She's a tech genius, a highly productive scientist, a love interest for another teammate, and somewhat of an anti-hero in her last season that gives in to the cruelty of her family's past. All of this makes up her story, which is, at least to me, surprisingly easy to follow with a lot of compounding of ideas over the course of her story. Her role in the story is similar to that of the first Alchemist, as a figure that started with good intentions until being lost to her hubris in desperate attempts to ignore her past. And of course, she's representative of gifted kids, as I mentioned, but that is more of an undertone to her story, as you can probably guess. So, I'm sorry, I'm just really happy with how all of this turned out. Oh my god, I wish I had something profound to say, but you know what? I really don't have much. And not that anything I've said is very profound anyway. The Aussie Devil isn't the type of character I usually create, but I had a lot of fun with her story, and I hope you guys weren't too annoyed with how long all of this was. I just wanted to say thank you again for sticking around. When I know people are watching, I hold myself accountable when I wouldn't otherwise. Heck, I completely redrew this character so that it would at least be a little more presentable to you guys. But anyway, that's pretty much it. Not really much of a conclusion today, I just kind of had fun with this one. But I hope y'all are doing well. Like I said last time, I hope there's at least something good going on in your life that you can look forward to, even if there are not a lot of good things. Sometimes things are rough and I get that, so I hope there's at least one glitter of hope for you somewhere in your life. There's gotta be at least one. Seriously, hope you all enjoy your day, and I guess this is V for Verbatim signing out until the next video. Take care and be excellent to each other. Bye!